soon as motions, so when we must start. So please.
So, very good morning and welcome to the second lecture in the Dean's 70th anniversary series. Tracing our antecedents back to the Indian School of International Studies, born way back in 1955 October. So our speaker for today is Professor Ashok Guha, a towering personality, and our teacher, most importantly, at the School of International Studies. Something very, very unique about him is his pedagogy, his teaching. And in fact, I just want to add one line before I hand it over to Sangeeta, is that he made economics very simple for me. For somebody who requires economics for dummies, I think he taught so well that it really made it simple. And I think this was the first class that I had in economics at MASIS. So thank you very much, sir, and a very warm welcome to you and to others. And I hand it over to formally to
Yeah. Could I just ask the faculty members, not that I'm being hierarchical, to come and sit here, because I know that many of you will be recognized by Professor Guha, Archana, Jayati, Namgyal, Saha is already. Yeah, Sangeeta, please.
Thank you, Preeti. A very good morning to all.
Rajan?
I'd like to, first of all, thank the team for this beautiful initiative, inviting, our SIS stalwarts and, giving us SIS faculty to learn about our heritage and to listen to them. And their lectures are so inspiring that it just fills up with enthusiasm and dedication. The first or inaugural lecture was a fascinating lecture by Professor Vishweshwar, and we all got to learn so much about those days when it used to be international school, Indian School of International Studies. It's an honor to welcome Professor Guha. Professor Guha is the founding pillar of CITD. He is the only professor who was at Indian School of International Studies, and then he joined School of International Studies when it was integrated with JNU. He has taught and mentored generations of students. I'm sure many of you had the pleasure of being taught by Professor Guha. And even though I wasn't a student, I still consider myself as a student because when I joined, he was still there in the center teaching and setting high standards. He has always had very high academic standards. He come to your office, ask you, what are you publishing? Where are you publishing? Suddenly you want to do even more. His scholarship, leadership, and dedication to the center is inspiring. Until last semester, he was teaching a course in development economics to our master students and one of the most popular courses. And so many students come and tell me, like, we have to do Professor Guha's course and, we'll adjust everything else, but that course we have to do. So thank you very much, sir, for shaping CITD to what it is today. And, it's an honor, and I just would like to invite Dean, Professor Mattu.
Thank you, Professor Bansal and Professor Preeti Singh. Distinguished colleagues, students, ladies and gentlemen, in this room and all those who are viewing the live stream across geographies. It's with immense pleasure and with a profound sense of my own humility that I welcome you to the second distinguished lecture in our series, celebrating 70 years of the School of International Studies, an institution whose future promises to be at least as great as its legacy, an institution which has given so much to this country and to the world by way of its ideas, its scholarship, and its alumni. Today, as you heard Professor Bansal point out, we are graced by the presence of an extraordinary teacher, a brilliant scholar, a great economist, A true luminary in the field, Professor Emeritus and former Dean of SIS, Professor Ashok Sanjay Guha, a scholar whose remarkable intellectual journey is still the stuff of legends. Ashok Sanjay Guha joined ISIS, the Indian School of International Studies, in 1963, and for several decades he taught the MA core course, Principles of Economic Organization, which is all that students of politics needed to complete to understand the global economy, and in the words of one former student, to be able to hold their own in on discussions on contemporary trends in global economic relations anywhere in the world. As a young man, Professor Guha distinguished himself not only through his unparalleled academic achievements, but also through his, what I consider, unwavering principles. At Calcutta Boys' School, he was considered, in the words of one junior, the most outstanding student the school had ever produced. He, of course, topped senior Cambridge, I believe, in the entire Commonwealth. His time at presidency was marked by brilliance with similar academic success, completing his BA in 1957 and MA in 1959. At Harvard University, which he joined immediately after his MA, he completed his PhD in 1 year and 9 months at the age of 23 in 1962, producing what probably remains the shortest thesis on record at just 64 pages. Yet it's not just his scholarly accolades that define him. There's a story which Professor Guha will insist that I invented that speaks perhaps to the very core of his character. An incident that reveals his courage and commitment to the foundational principles of all that is good about humanity. During a pivotal MA examination, when confronted with a paper that was shockingly out of syllabus, Professor Guha made a bold choice. Despite knowing he could personally tackle every question posed, he chose to walk out in solidarity with his fellow students. This act of standing up, a testament to his integrity, I am reliably informed by one of his students, drew the ire of the establishment and powerful economists of his time, especially the great Babatosh Datta, who later on went to win a Padma Vibhushan, yet lifted his reputation as a principal leader, unafraid to stand up for what was right. Babatosh Babu was debarred from setting a paper again, I'm told, and never quite forgave Professor Ashok Guha. But then Ashok Guha was unfashionably anti-establishment, and in that time it meant anti-left, a formidable debater, in the words of a junior, with a dry wit. As he transitioned to become a foundational figure in the Infant School of International Studies, a professor at the age of 24, Professor Guha is probably the oldest teacher from the very inception of JNU at SIS, his legacy woven into the very fabric of our institution. A rarity among his peers, he was one of the few non-Marxist economics in JNU, offering a fresh perspective that challenged conventional thought. His influential work in evolutionary view of economic growth continues to resonate within the academic community. And as we were walking up, recounted an anecdote where John Hicks, perhaps the most influential economist of his generation, if not for the last century, who won the Nobel Prize, came to visit him and traveled down campus, walking up at the age of 85 floors to meet Professor Guha after he had read Professor Guha's manuscript of his evolutionary view of economic growth. Professor Guha's contribution extends beyond traditional economics. His book, Economics Without Tears, serves as a valuable resource, brilliantly demystifying economic concepts for those daunted by mathematics. Through his engaging prose, he has opened the door of economic understanding to countless readers, empowering them to grasp the intricacies of the subject with confidence. A polymath whose scholarship extends from the world of psychoanalysis to digging deep into subjects like a recent article in Swaraj on Aryan invasion, migration in and out of India, debates Furthermore, Ashok Guha has been an exceptional institution builder, having founded the MA in Economics program in the school and having played a pivotal role in recruiting many of us, me included, in order to successfully break the vicious cycle of inbreeding prevalent in the school until then. As we gather today to celebrate the legacy of our esteemed institution, let us honor not only the academic brilliance of Ashok Sanjay Goa, but also the indomitable spirit of a man who embodies the values of integrity, courage, and intellectual curiosity. A man who exemplifies what is best about the School of International Studies, a sustained and a resilient commitment to scholarly excellence. I now invite Professor Ashok Sanjay Goa to deliver the second of our 70th anniversary lectures. Ashok Sanjay Goa.
Before that, may I request the dean to felicitate?
Okay. It's you don't need to. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Amitabh, for a thoroughly undeserved eulogy. I won't call it an introduction, an eulogy, which I disclaim. However, it's always nice to hear such words, however undeserved they might be. I also thank all of you, including Preeti, Samgita, and others, for attending this lecture and listening to what perhaps might strike you as heretical, but to me it doesn't seem so. It seems merely common sense. Okay, to start the ball rolling, I'll tell you a story, a true story. See, the story begins in the 1990s. The 1990s were an age of high finance globally. Stock markets were booming everywhere. Everyone was buying stocks. Many were buying promises to deliver stocks at a later date. Some were buying promises to buy stocks at a later date, and so on and so forth, in a long paper trail of virtual promises, which ended remotely in assets, physical assets, ownership of physical assets. All economists wanted to specialize in finance. Three of them pored over masses of statistics that they had accumulated over the years of the financial boom and formulated what is known as the MBS, not the MBS that students of international relations talk about, but Merton, Black, and Scholes. So they formulated the MBS equation, which essentially was an equation that was supposed to predict the course of what are known as derivative prices. Derivatives are these assets virtual assets, these pieces of paper that give you ownership of more pieces of paper, which in turn give you ownership of more pieces of paper, etc., until you get to the shares. So, Merton, Black, and Scholes formulated this equation for predicting the prices of derivatives. But they did much more than that. They actually put their money where their mouths were. Instead of merely theorizing, they set up a firm using the NBS formula in order to do roaring business in trading stock options. Thousands of investors invested in their firm, attracted by the belief that economists must know all about the derivatives and their prices. I don't know if any members of the Nobel Economics Committee were among these investors, but in 1997, MBS, or rather MS, B had died meanwhile, so MS received the Nobel Prize. 2 months after the award, MBS's firm went bankrupt. They all lost the millions of dollars, including the entire Nobel Prize money. Their investors lost billions. Many regard it as the starting point of the first great global financial crisis, the East Asian crisis of 1997-98. Since then, the economics Nobel has been viewed with a degree of skepticism which is only matched by the cynicism with which we regard the Nobel Peace Prize. You remember Barack Obama, who received the Nobel Prize in 2008, Nobel Peace Prize in 2008, and then proceeded to drop millions of tons of bombs on other countries. More bombs, in fact, than any other individual in human history. So, Nobel Prizes, including, or maybe especially, the economics Nobel, are not sacrosanct. They need to be scrutinized carefully to ensure that they are really justified. So this is the reason why I investigated this year's Nobel Award. And these are the conclusions. Okay. What I'll do in going into this is that first I'll present the conclusions, then the proof, and then we'll go on to further discussion. The 2004 Economics Nobel was given to Acemoglu, Johnson, and Robinson, AJR for short, for their work on the secret of economic growth. Now that's a very sexy subject. Question is, did AJR do justice to their sexy theme? Okay. Let's look at their conclusions first. It's up here. AJR claimed that the secret of economic growth lies in the quality of institutions, and in particular, the question of whether institutions promote economic freedom or not. Economic freedom means freedom of labor movement, freedom of labor more generally, freedom of capital movement, freedom of land transactions, freedom of consumer choice, freedom of trade. Now, AJR claimed that Western Europe acquired such institutions very early in the day. Then, during the colonization process, they transplanted these institutions in those colonies where they settled, but not in others where they ruled but did not settle. For instance, India, for instance, most of Africa. Now, in these countries, their prime incentive was to get rich quick. Prime incentive was to get rich quick, to make a fast buck, and then retire to a life of luxury at home as the nabobs, as they were called. Now, since their motivation was plunder, they developed institutions that facilitated plunder, which enabled them to get rich quick, but also to suck the colony dry. Now, question is, if the settlement of the white colonists was so crucial, what determined the pattern of settlement? Well, by and large, Europeans settled in temperate, empty countries with low mortality and cheap land. These were the New Europes. The US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, perhaps Argentina, perhaps the extreme southwest of Africa. So these countries flourished. Other colonies did not. In fact, they were reduced to penury. Okay. So this, according to, one other point in their argument was that when the colonialists left, they bequeathed to the elites, the local elites that succeeded them, the same institutions. And so the pattern of extractive policy continued. And this was what determined the distribution of income and poverty worldwide. This, in brief, is the Acemoglu Johnson Robinson conclusions. As such, this is not a proof. But Acemoglu is an excellent economist, so he produced a proof. The proof consisted of two main propositions. The first was that he or the three of them showed that there is a negative association between the per capita incomes of many, many countries worldwide, and the investors' estimates of the risk of expropriation in these countries. Now, in short, well, Acemoglu Johnson Robinson felt that this perception of expropriation risk was a summary measure of the quality of institutions, because it showed the hostility of the local environment in any country to investment and economic development. Now, an association is not necessarily, does not establish the direction of causation. It does not establish which of the two variables that are associated is the cause and which is the effect. It could be that these high risk of expropriation leads to poor economic performance because investors don't invest. But it could also be that poor economic performance leads to hostility towards investors, and consequently to expropriation risk and a perception of expropriation risk. So how did AJR establish the direction of causation? Well, to do this, they developed a much more controversial exercise. They showed that there's a negative association also between settler morality, Western settler mortality, I should say, mortality in 1650 and per capita income in 1995. Now, obviously, it makes no sense to hold that high per capita income today could explain low mortality in 1650. So the only causation that you cannot have reverse causation, the only causation that is possible is from high mortality in the past to low per capita income today. But how did that work? Well, it worked according to the mechanism that I described earlier. High mortality in the 17th century led to a reluctance on the part of settlers or reluctance on the part of Westerners to settle. Therefore, it led to get-rich-quick policies, institutions that promoted getting rich quick, and therefore to institutions that discourage economic growth. So, through this indirect means, Acemoglu Johnson Robinson claimed to have established that poor institutions deter economic growth, and good institutions promote it. Or I should say that more specifically, that institutions that promote economic freedom promote economic growth. Now, those of you who are aficionados of crime fiction will recognize AJR's method of proof. It is the technique of elimination. You eliminate all possible suspects except one, and then settle on this one as the culprit responsible for the body in the library. I should say that when I should go back a little bit and say that when AJR isolated institutions as the factor crucial for economic growth, they also tested a couple of others. For instance, distance from the coast, distance from the equator, rainfall, etc. And they showed that inclusion of these variables does not improve the fit of their model to the data. And so they said, institutions and institutions alone are the key to economic growth. Okay, now if you, going back to the crime fiction story, you know, of course, that the technique of elimination is employed by the not so bright police inspector. But as soon as Sherlock Holmes or Hercule Poirot appear on the scene and look around, they discover lots of others whom the police inspector didn't take into account. They find that there was a prodigal son just back from the colonies. He was approaching the library. There's the butler concealing his ample proportions behind the curtains in the library. None of these had been taken into account by Inspector Lestrade or whoever it was. Now, in the case in point, there is no shortage of prodigal sons or missing butlers. To give you just one example, an example that owes nothing at all to institutions, there is the malaria parasite. The prime killer of Europeans in the tropics before quinine was malaria. And even today, malaria is the scourge of Africa and much of East and South Asia. True, it doesn't no longer kills people outright, but it reduces labor productivity and per capita income. So, AJR fails what is called the exclusion test. The exclusion test is a requirement that any scientific hypothesis must fulfill. It is that you rule out all other possible explanations. You don't in AJR's case. There are many other examples. The malaria parasite example is only one that is at the top of my head. For instance, the great 20th century geographer Ellsworth Huntington, actually showed that there's a strong correlation between poverty and temperature and humidity. You can dispute that, but the point is it's an alternative. And this correlation existed, exists not only today, but 300 years earlier. So there is a missing variable which AGR does not take into account, or many missing variables, which both account for low income today and high mortality in the past. So it's not true that poor institutions are the only link between the two. Okay. So, second problem with the AJR thesis is the fact that it is not robust. By robustness, we mean that if I drop or change some of the arbitrary assumptions inherent in a particular hypothesis, nothing happens to the conclusions. The conclusions are able to withstand this change. Now, AJR are not trying to establish the causes for high incomes or low incomes in 1995. What they are trying to do is to find a general key to the economic growth. So, the 1995 endpoint is an arbitrary assumption and not essential to the main argument. If you change the endpoints of the history, then nothing should happen to the conclusions. But if AJR had concluded their exercise not in 1995, but say in 1850, what would they have found? They would have found that the richest economies at that point of history are the Caribbean countries: Haiti, Cuba, Jamaica, Barbados, and the southern states of the US. Thriving plantations of sugar, cotton, tobacco, up to 1850, had made these countries very, very attractive to capital from Western Europe and the rest of the US. Very attractive in spite of their very poor health conditions to labor. And they would also have discovered that the secret of the success of these economies at that point of time was not economic freedom at all, but slavery. Now, I consider that these two problems mean that AGR's proof collapses. And what they have done is not created a hypothesis, a scientific hypothesis, but an opinion. Should one give the Nobel Prize for opinions? Your opinion is as good as mine. I'll mention yet another problem with the AGR hypothesis. See, according to it, economic growth is a linear process. If a country has good institutions, it will continue to develop rapidly. If it has bad institutions, then it will decline rapidly. But there's no room in this story for a country which does well up to a certain point in time and then declines. And yet, this is central to the historical experience of many, many countries the world over. I mean, even AGR themselves talk about the fact that in the 17th century, the world was dominated by the great Asian empires, by Ming or Manchu China, by Mughal India, by Safavid Iran, by Ottoman Turkey. But by the 19th century, these had all collapsed to the status of poor, beggarly countries, low down in the world economic hierarchy, economic and political hierarchy. Forget about that. Even called European miracle. You have any number of instances of this kind, of what is generally regarded as a reversion from one status to another. In the 15th and 16th centuries, the leading economies of Europe were Spain and Portugal. But by the 17th, they had already declined to minor powers in comparison with their northern neighbors, England, France, and Holland. Holland was the world's leading economy in the 17th century. But by the 18th century, late 18th century, it had become again a minor power compared to England. England was the first industrial nation and the workplace of the world. From the late 18th century, the Industrial Revolution, to the end of the 19th century. In the 19th century, late 19th century, England declines. Despite all the good institutions that they must have had in order to have flourished so long, they decline. They decline and give way to the US, to Russia, to Germany. These become the major economies and major powers of the world. So why does this kind of inversion of economic and political hierarchies take place? AGR have no clue. Now, I'm not saying that institutions don't matter. Institutions are in many ways crucial. Why? Reasons are there. I can't really see anything.
All So transactions require security of life, property, and contract.
Exactly. Okay. So thanks.
Yeah.
So any kind of transaction requires these has these requirements. You require security of life, of property, and of contract. Without these, no transactions. Without transactions, economic life is itself impossible. Forget about economic growth. And these security conditions require something else.
Predictable tax system and laws.
Yes. They require state funded by a
Regular and predictable tax system, not by arbitrary expropriation. And states must enforce laws that are impersonal, predictable, and calculable.
Okay. So these are institutions. Yeah, you can reduce the light. Maybe then I'll be able to see. Okay, that's better. So these are institutions, political institutions, legal institutions, which are essential for economic growth. But there are caveats here. Institutions may assume many very different forms. Substitutes may emerge even for basic institutions like the state. See, the Maghrebi Traders Coalition was a group of Jews, Jewish merchants, who traded all over the Mediterranean region between the 11th and 13th centuries. They traded despite the fact that they had no legal protection at all from the Muslim and Christian countries in which they traded. How did they solve their legal disputes? Without any machinery of the formal machinery of the kind that state provides. Well, they had their own unique institutional arrangements. I won't go into that. Brishti has written about it. The Champagne fairs were the main forum of international trade for hundreds of years in medieval Europe. But the merchants who traded at these fairs came from many different countries with many different legal systems and no common agreement on the basis of which their disputes could be resolved. What is more, the Champagne authorities, the local authorities at Champagne, had no coercive power at all over these merchants. So how did the fairs function? And the fairs functioned very well. And they functioned for 300, 400 years. So institutions are a very flexible kind of thing. Moreover, which is even more important, institutions are not carved in stone, not like geography. Geography is largely immutable. But institutions evolve. Institutions change under the pressure of circumstances. So then how do you decide which is fundamental? Institutions or much more basic factors to which these institutions have adapted. So institutions don't really work, even though they are important. They may very well be merely adaptive variables. Okay. So you might ask, by the way, how am I doing for time?
That's fine. Sir. That's fine. Another 10 minutes or so or more?
No, I see. What's the time now?
11:53.
Oh, okay, then I'll stop at this point. I'll continue later if anyone raises these questions. I have not gone into the question of any alternative explanation, but if anybody wants, we can go into it later. So my main focus here was to analyze the hypothesis of AGR, and I'm done with that. Okay, so if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
I'm sure there are going to be lots of questions after that fantastic lecture. Let me begin by asking you what you stopped at. If not institutions, then what?
Okay, I've considered some alternative explanations, by and large rejecting them also. So one alternative explanation is technical change, technical progress. So there are excellent examples of how technological change fuels economic growth. To give you some instances, open ocean navigation. Technology of open ocean navigation was developed in the 15th, 16th centuries, and it led to a huge expansion of sea routes, trade, the commercial revolution, as it is sometimes called, the discovery of the new world, the growth of trade and of economies on the basis of this. So that's an example of the importance of technology. Second example, coke smelting, the smelting of iron ore by coke rather than wood or charcoal, along with the invention of the steam engine, invention or rather the reinvention of the steam engine. Those who have read my book on the subject will know that the steam engine was originally invented in the 1st century AD by a Greek with the appropriate name of Hero in Alexandria, but then lost and reinvented in the 18th century by James Newcomen. Okay. So the steam engine and coke smelting together created the Industrial Revolution. And you know the economic growth effects of the Industrial Revolution. Then take the invention of the railway engine. That transformed the economies of the West. It led to the opening up, the settlement of the New World, the growth of agriculture, growth of trade between Europe and America. So it changed the whole contours of the world economy. You can go back, this is only since the 15th century, you can go back to earlier centuries and talk about more more such examples. And Robert Solow, another Nobel laureate, but I think a more deserving one. He wrote one of the most famous, probably the most widely cited economics paper of all time, in which he showed that the economic growth of the US, well, at least 40% of the economic growth of the US is not attributable to the growth of capital or the growth of labor. It is attributable to a residual. There's a residual after you have accounted for the effects of
7, 8, not 40%, not 50%, 7, 8 is attributable to the residual.
well, that must be a recent, more.
No, 1957. Sorry.
True?
Yes.
Okay.
7,
I stand corrected. So 7/8.
only 1/8 is explained by capital.
Okay, not capital labor.
Capital labor ratio. Yeah. Growth of capital.
Okay. So anyway,
Per capita.
the so he attributes economic growth empirically to technical progress. Now, let's grant his analysis. There have been many challenges to his method. I'm not going into that. They are good challenges, by the way. But let's assume that away these challenges. But let's look at some more data. From the mid 20th century to today, we have had the most spectacular technological and scientific progress in history. In fact, one of the advantages of having lived very long, as I have, is to appreciate the enormity of the scientific and technical advances that have taken place since my childhood. See, well, the cracking of the atom, of course, happened a little earlier, but the unlocking of the secrets of DNA, the computer revolution, the mobile phone, space exploration, space technology, laser technology, and many, many, many others. So these 50, 60 years have been have seen the highlights of scientific and technological accomplishment in history. And which was the nerve center of all this? The US. And to some extent, Western Europe. But during these 60 years, the US and Western Europe have stagnated economically. while low-tech East Asia and very, very low-tech South Asia have progressed at rates which are unprecedented in human history. So, how can one ignore these facts and claim that technological progress is the secret to economic growth? Those who would like to dispute my characterization of East Asia as low tech would be contradicted by the econometric studies of Lawrence Lau and Alvin Young, who show that in fact technological progress contributed little or nothing to the growth of East Asia. So, technology is really a dubious key to economic progress. You can look at for other variables.
What about culture?
Culture is, goes along with institutions.
We engage on the technology issue a bit before you move on.
Yeah, I mean, so invite questions, Professor.
Sure.
You see, the kind of definition of technological progress that you have in mind is essentially should be clear. I mean, you're talking about major breakthroughs, but of late, technological progress, the definition has been. I mean, if you look at Rosenberg, for instance, he doesn't believe in the Schumpeterian view at all. I mean, he says it's incremental, small changes. So in that sense, you cannot really write off the fast-growing East Asia or even not so fast, but quite fast-growing South Asia out of the technology map, because not in terms of major breakthroughs, surely, but definitely in terms of minor innovations and incremental innovations and productivity gains.
We are comparing their technological advances with the technological advances of the West.
No, that's very different.
No, that's not very,
Qualitatively
very different.
No.
We are talking about technological progress as being an engine of growth.
different.
Why then should it not have been an engine of growth in the West?
It has been, but it was sort of maybe overshadowed by the major breakthroughs, the shifting of the production function, I guess, because no other countries were shifting their production functions, and so therefore that was the prime driver. But
What was the
the
price?
shifting of the production function,
Okay.
which of course these countries are not doing. They are basically trying to engage in incremental innovations, which is contributing to it.
Okay.
I mean, that could be another theory. I mean,
Sure.
so broadly speaking, technology
Absolutely.
is
So
not out.
we'll open it up a little and then perhaps you can respond. Before I ask Professor Maushami Basu, I would like to press you again on the cultural part. Apart from institutions, if you look historically, some of the work of, say, Max Weber, the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism, or the Needham question on China. Why did China decline? And again, looking for Confucian cultural explanations. Is that something which is mildly persuasive, even though it's harder to quantify? But that's one question I'll leave you with, Professor Basu.
Thank you, sir. I just want to hear your reflections on.
I can't hear you.
I
Can
just
you?
want to hear your reflections
Yeah.
on universities as an institution and the role that universities play. I mean, as a very important part of the larger
Yeah.
history.
Professor Basu is also the president of our Teachers Association. So it's something which is very germane to all of us. But Professor Negi.
Thank you, sir, and thank you very much for this discussion. before I come to my question, actually, this reminded me of a time about more than 15 years ago when the JNUTA used to do a week-long session on discussing all the Nobels of the year, where people from the sciences, from literature, from economics, from different disciplines.
Can you speak closer to the mic?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Should I just repeat?
Yeah, this is fine. Yeah.
No, I was just reminded by a talk of about 15 years ago when this used to be regularly done, organized by the JNUTA, where professors, faculty from different disciplines across the university used to discuss each of the Nobel Prizes of the year and similarly critique them, assess them, and it was a very, very interesting sort of activity. I think it stopped somewhere down the line, but your talk today reminded me of that very useful sort of activity that JNU did. But coming to the 2024 Economics Prize, the critiques that I read of the 2024 Economics Prize, and I'm not from economics, two of the sort of identified blind spots. One was to do with corruption. How do you explain corruption of institutions? Because many of the countries which have proceeded on the development trajectories have had corrupt institutions. That's been one of the critiques. But the second most interesting critique from non-economists especially is to do with the overlooking of colonialism. And after the Nobel Prize was given, apparently the winners said that we are not going into the question of whether colonialism was good or bad. And that seems to have created a whole lot of criticism because it comes back to a disciplinary critique that mainstream economics does not want to use the normative lens at all. And why should this question be? So, just want to hear your views on that.
Would you like to respond right now or take a few more questions? Or
No, but perhaps you can.
Replay.
I still couldn't
Yeah.
hear much of what.
I'll tell you, the one is Maushami's question is to do with,
Maushami's question, I heard.
and Archana's question is to do with the ethical, I mean, I'm telegraph in this, the ethical blind spot that mainstream economics seems to have, that although there is a distinction between inclusive institution and extractive institutions, there is no, the economists do not reflect on colonialism as an ideology or as a practice and the kind of pitfalls that had. So the ethical dimensions of colonialism are not something that seems to perturb the conscience of the Nobel laureates. Is that a, and the corruption and how institutions, how certain institutions can be corrupt and how that, and what was the question on that, corruption?
So there has been one line of critique which says, uses the examples of the growth of China, for instance, and also the growth of the United States, which has rested not just on robust institutions, but on very, very corrupt institutional systems. So how is that factored into the thesis?
Okay. Is there any other question? And then we can, yeah, Sangeeta, Professor Bansal?
Yeah,
And,
just,
yeah.
Taking from what Ashna had said. So, since institutions can be shaped or endogenous, so I'd like to, your reflections on what could be the basic factors that shape institutions. Some institutions become good institutions and some as bad, as age as theory. But what are the basic factors that determine the shaping of institutions?
So finally, are there any students? And then I'll, yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, sir.
Can't hear you.
Yeah. Oh, I'll kind of replay your question.
Okay, fine, no issues. My question is related with technological progress. This is related with artificial intelligence. So I just want to, have your views that how is it going to impact economic growth for the countries that are labor intensive and capital intensive. So.
Okay. Any other student questions, especially, I mean, please, CITD was known for the robustness of its student body as well.
They're failing the robustness check.
Okay, they may fail the exclusion test, which means anyone but a CITD student. Okay. Okay. So
Can
the
you-
last question was
yeah.
the last question was essentially how is AI, machine learning, artificial intelligence, machine learning going to impact on the economy, especially those who are either labor intensive or capital intensive. So, what is the overall impact of AI going to be in terms of a forecast? Yeah, I mean, actually, the mic is fitted in, so you can speak. So.
Okay, how did I go about this?
Universities.
Yeah.
University as an institution.
Is that something that AJR model would factor in?
No.
How you create good universities?
No, he doesn't say, they don't say anything at all about how you create institutions. That's a problem. Certainly nothing at all about universities. So, now, I myself would include universities among the institutions that adapt to circumstances. So I don't regard it as a fundamental key to growth. But universities may have a role in the growth process. But it's not that you somehow transplant good universities in country X, which is poor and underdeveloped, and you'll have rapid growth from them. It doesn't happen that way. It doesn't happen that any single institution can be transplanted like this in an environment which is backward, and that will fuel economic growth. Okay. Where are we next?
Archana.
Corruption and then
Yeah.
Okay. Now, about the ethical dimensions of growth. As you probably know, economists have tried to model, or I should say interfere in this field quite vigorously of late. They have constructed various things called the sort of indices of so-called quality of life or happiness index, and have generally tried to link these, to try to substitute the economic concept of GDP or per capita income by concepts related to human development index or happiness, whatever. Now, the problem with introducing a moral dimension here is that your morals and mine do not necessarily match. And whose morals should get precedence? I don't know. For example, on the question of equality, should equality be measured in terms of equality of opportunity or equality of income? Secondly, should equality be an objective at all? Because the question would arise, if equality is achieved at the expense of incentive, then would you not have an economy which does not develop at all? Because you have destroyed the incentive to work, the incentive to produce, the incentive to save. Would you not have what Nehru called a redistribution of poverty instead of economic growth? So these are questions which, to which there are no indisputable answers. I have gone into this question of how to include such concepts as inclusiveness or equality in your measures of economic development. And I have gone into the question of what we really mean. What we really mean when we talk about economic development. We say all sorts of things, but this has very little to do with our revealed actions. For example, there are two factors which you might look at as revealing your judgment about different societies. One is migration. When I migrate from country A to country B, what do my actions tell you? My actions tell you that I prefer the way of life of country B. However much I might claim that no, country B is terrible. Why do I go there? Why do I settle there? The second factor that indicates how I feel is the rate of suicide. If a society has a high rate of suicide, that indicates more than what they might say. It indicates how they rate the prospect of life in that society. Now, why this is crucial is because of the striking discrepancies you find between suicide rates and per capita incomes. In India, for example, the Human Development Index is much the highest in Kerala. The suicide rate is also 3 times that of the rest of India. The out-migration rate is also many times that of any other state. The same thing you could look at on a worldwide scale. Greenland was a protectorate of Denmark. In 1960 or so, I think Greenland became a protectorate of Denmark. And the Danish government, which is a very welfareist kind of government, decided to modernize Greenland by giving them hospitals, modern schools, construction of good housing, and so on and so forth. What happened? No doubt, the inhabitants of Greenland liked all these things. But in Greenland, the suicide rate had been 0 in 1960. Today, every fourth person in Greenland has attempted suicide at some point in his life. And what about Denmark itself? Denmark is the world's highest consumer of antidepressant drugs. That is what keeps down the suicide rate in Denmark. Take Norway, another very happy state according to the various happiness indices that we are presented with. Well, when you go to Norway, one of the first things you learn is to avoid taxis. Why? Because the taxi fare is so high that you will be lucky if you escape with your clothes. But the taxi business is flourishing. Do you know why? Because every weekend, Norwegians gather in groups in order to hire taxis so that they can go and drink themselves senseless and then be brought back by their hired taxi. So this is the level of happiness that this great socialist state has achieved. So you can go on multiplying instances like this. These make it very difficult to use concepts like happiness or inclusiveness as measures of success in development.
I think I asked you about what shapes institutions and how can we have good institutions.
That is too big a question for me to address. I can't do that.
Professor Guha, of course, ruled out that universities can play a
No,
critical
they
role in
can't
shaping
play-
institutions.
They can't play a role in
Through ideas?
through ideas. Yes, the ideas are good, but they don't impinge on what actually happens until something else happens.
Thank you.
See, even ideas in the field of science, I gave you the example of the steam engine. In the 1st century AD, the ideas behind the steam engine were known, but nothing happened for 1500 years. Nothing that affected the world in general. See, in the 1st century AD, when Hero invented his steam engine, what he did with it was to use it in the temple at Alexandria. See, when the sacrifice was placed on the altar and the fire lit, the thermal energy created steam, and the steam opened the doors of the temple automatically, and the populace was thunderstruck. God has accepted the sacrifice and has come to receive it. So that was the use to which the steam engine was put when it was first invented. But 1500 years later, the steam engine was reinvented for the purpose of draining water from coal mines. Very different kind of situation. So ideas are great, but they are not adequate.
Necessary but not sufficient.
Sure.
Professor Mooney, would you like to say something, sir? May I then, in other words, the Manhattan Project brought home the importance of nuclear energy rather than Rutherford and Niels Bohr, what they did in the laboratory. But Amit, would you formally conclude the proceedings by a vote of thanks? Yes, please, Dr. Rajan.
Can I take?
Yeah, sure.
That will not come down. Thank you very much, sir. The reason I'm speaking because I was in your class, 95, 97.
Oh.
You want to call around 10 to 12 students were there in your class, and many students are doing very, very well. One in University of California teaching second one in Cornell. One is the Deputy Commissioner UK, and I sent you a video clip here to that group, and all of them are commenting that how they learned game theory and other things from you. And I still remember the book that was Sam Wilson used to be the book that I used to read, the thick book. I think he was also a Nobel laureate or something. So
First Nobel laureate.
Probably first, yeah. So we are very, very grateful to you. And in that comment section, there is one very funny comment which has come from a Bengali friend of mine in that group, Ila Bandopadhyay, and she's in Calcutta right now. She is saying that she was very excited that I'm joining such a bright Bengali teacher in the class till the time she got the grade, which was C. And they're all happy, sir. They wish you all the best and very good health. And they're very happy that you speak so well, very audible today also. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Amit.
Thank you so much.
I teach here in school.
So it's my pleasant duty to conclude the session by proposing a vote of thanks. But I would first like to thank our Dean, Professor Amitabh Mattu, for giving us this excellent opportunity to listen to Professor Guha once again. It's sort of, I relived those days when I used to listen to him, and I'm glad that everybody else who have not had the chance to go through that experience of presenting forceful, solid, technical, economic arguments in such a lucid, plain language, appealing to everybody. Of course, he is very opinionated. He came with the objective, the goal of demolishing AJR, but he's been teaching AJR. I mean, this paper was written in 2001, right? Yeah, whatever, so the American Economic Review is 2001. So the Nobel Committee, of course, I completely agree with Professor Guha when he talks about the NBS, the debacle of the Nobel after the NBS or MS got the prize. But of course, institutions are important. We have had prior instances where institutional economists like Douglas North got a Nobel Prize, which got to the fore the importance of institutions as drivers of economic growth. But of course, listening to Professor Guha is a pleasure, and I have multiple reasons to thank him. The first reason is, without this towering scholarship of economics, so deep-rooted in his mind, he could be the right person to be here at an interdisciplinary school and develop the sense of economics analytical framework and economics analytical thinking among budding international relations scholars. And we tried to continue the legacy for some time. And I hope with the blessings of our new dean, we can continue to, sort of again take off and, be at that juncture where Professor Guha took ITD decades back. The second reason I should thank him, because I'm possibly the only privileged colleague in ITD with whom he has condescended to write a paper with. Even our colleague, Professor Ashok Guha, who was a PhD student of Ashok Guha, had never published anything. So when I joined in 95, same year as you, in 97, 98, Ashok Guha was a theoretician, and one day he walked into my office and says, Amin, as an applied economist, you have no future. You have absolutely no future, so forget about applied economics and go into scale. But now I see even heavyweight economic theoreticians like Abhijit Banerjee, all doing applied economics.
Whom also Professor Guha has written a paper, I think, with Abhijit.
No.
Yeah.
You've written a paper with, right, of course. So now he comes towards, to my office was late 90s, and says that I would like to, collaborate with you where I need to put in an applied economics element in it. This is the broad idea of my hypothesis. Can we work out a testable, So that was, just to remind him, this is a very well cited paper on expatriate investments by Indian and Chinese, non-resident Indians and non-resident Chinese, a comparative analysis and implications on the respective economic developments. So thank you, Ashok, for giving me that opportunity and privilege. I'm really honored for that. Of course, later you have co-authored with your daughter, who is also a colleague in CITT. So I lose that exclusive privilege in CITT. So thank you for handing over the legacy of introducing an MA program in SIS, which is unique, which is not like any other MA's conventional MA programs. This is an MA program which emphasizes on the world economy. And we try to inculcate the students in MA SIS, MSc ITD, to realize that while mainstream economic theory teaches us many things, but also it is important to understand how economies are located globally and how the global economic interactions matter even when they talk about their local economies. I could go on and on, but I'm sure Amita would like me to stop here. But thank you, Ashok, thank you ever so much. And I look forward to listening to you at SIS for years to come now. At least as long as I am here, which is like 3 more years.
Yes, absolutely.
Both me and Amitabh. So thank you, Ashok.
Thank you very much. And on the 22nd, we'll have Professor B.S. Chimney come and speak here on international law and how it shaped SIS. Thank you, sir. I'll tell you after I meet the VC.
Sorry?